Joining us now to discuss Chinese troops in Ukraine is Kervin Aucoin, former lead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance coordinator for the U.S. Army, as well as the host of This Week Explained podcast. Good to see you this morning, Kervin. What are your understandings about these troops? Could they be Chinese nationals acting on their own accord, or are they definitely CCP military troops?
Well, as always, thank you for having me this morning. So the first thoughts are we've got to find out what they are. Most likely, it is that we have Chinese nationals that were recruited by Russia. We've seen Russia do this with Indian nationals. So it kind of looks like similar to the international forces within Ukraine, that international legion of Western forces that have volunteered to go into the conflict to battle with Ukraine against that Russian aggression. Looks like what we have here are Chinese nationals who have decided to go into Russia and fight this conflict. Now, what's interesting here is that as opposed to the North Korean troops that kind of stayed on the Russian on Russian turf, it looks like these Chinese forces have now gone into the Ukrainian portion of the battlefield, and that is an escalation.
Before we move on to some of the other implications, I want to get your take on the difference between sort of westernized countries or potentially in the Muslim world where you might have a group of individuals who would join a militia versus Chinese nationals who are under the control of ultimately the Chinese Communist Party. It would seem unlikely that they could just join in without the at least approval or allowance by somebody within the Chinese Communist Party. What's your take?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're not going to see, or we would not see Chinese nationals without the approval of the CCP, just in the way that the Chinese Communist Party works in China, just being allowed to, or being allowed to without the CCP allowing that. But also, the CCP is not going to publicly say that they're allowing it. They're going to use their back channels. They're going to not publicly state that people can go, but if they go, they will tell the international community, we cannot stop them from, fighting with Russia in this war in Ukraine, just as the West can't stop Western people from volunteering with the International Legion in Ukraine and fighting against Russia.
Now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is meeting with Russian officials, I believe, tomorrow. What are your expectations for that meeting? It seems like the stakes now raised with this recent development.
Yeah, and really funny, this all comes out just before that meeting. And the talk over the last month has been, is Putin going to sign at least a ceasefire deal? And does he actually want peace and an end to this conflict? Secretary of State Marco Rubio is going to have to press this. I think President Donald Trump needs to continue to press this. But there was that moment where President Trump told President Zelensky, you're holding no cards in this. You have to come from an area that you are losing because you're holding no cards. Well, guess what? With this announcement, I do think Zelensky is holding some cards here that he can hold Putin's feet to the fire.
Now, in your estimation, China potentially getting certainly funding or through trading, enabling Russia to continue this war for so long. But now with China having some of its own people on the ground, what does that mean for Taiwan?
Well, it's the first thing that comes to mind is that if these are more than Chinese nationals and they are Chinese forces that have been moved into Russia, now, again, that's not confirmed, but if that is what happens, then you are looking at a military that is trying to learn lessons for a future large-scale combat operation. That large-scale combat operation would be in Taiwan. Now, look, China has not been in a war or a major large-scale conflict in quite a long time. So in order to get forces in there to gather lessons learned of what a near-peer or a peer-peer conflict looks like, it's heavily beneficial to the PLA and the CCP in their coming up invasion of Taiwan.
Now, in terms of potentially diverting resources, though, you would think that if China is now somewhat viewed as being a participant, not just a funder of Russia's war, might that in some ways make them now want to negotiate for peace because it would distract from their ability to have a focus on the Taiwan theater and their own backyard? Or do you think that it's more beneficial for them to actually get this experience as you were just describing?
Well, I think it is more beneficial to get this experience. And the reason is because, look, Russia is sending their own people through a meat grinder here. They are losing troops at high numbers. They need to replenish them. That's why North Korean troops are there. That's why we are seeing these Chinese nationals now in Russian uniforms. It's not the first time. This is just the first time officially that President Zelensky has talked about this. But U.S. intelligence has been very clear in open source that we have seen Chinese nationals, at least in the dozens, helping, if not fighting, weapon on weapon. They are helping the Russians. And the reason this helps China is because it distracts and it pulls resources from the United States and Western Europe into Ukraine to continue the fighting and to possibly be a distraction if, once that invasion starts in Taiwan. And then there is this thought, maybe among President Xi, that the world is not ready for, and there's no appetite for a global conflict. So would the international community just allow the CCP to envelop Taiwan and take it because it serves no greater purpose for the international community?
Yeah, these next few days seem like they'll be quite interesting with the tariff war heating up and now Russia sitting really between the U.S. and China and this recent development with the Chinese boots on the ground. So much to explore. We'll have to have you back and talk more about it. Kervin Aucoin, former lead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance coordinator for the U.S. Army, as well as the host of This Week Explained podcast. Thanks so much, Kervin.
Thank you so much. I'll see you again, and stay safe out there.